My guest today is Steve Simpson. He is an expert on workplace culture and customer service. Steve, you've also authored 2 books, A Culture Turned and Cracking the Corporate Culture Code.
I've been working in the workplace culture space for more than 30 years now. And when I first entered this space, I realised that culture, and I think this is even more so in the last 10 to 20 years, the term culture has been used increasingly. And the conundrum from my perspective was that while it was being used a great deal, a lot of people really didn't understand what it meant in practical terms. And what you don't understand, you can't manage. What you don't manage, you become a victim of. And I saw many people, including leaders, who knew that their culture was not quite as good as it could be, but felt powerless in terms of what to do about it. And so that's the reason I created the UGRs concept. UGRs, Unwritten Ground Rules, which I define as people's perceptions of this is the way we do things around here. And we've developed that over many years to the point where we can work with organisations to help them both understand and strategically improve their culture. So that's the space I've been engaged in for a long time.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for joining us today. The first question that comes to mind is the world has changed. So is culture still as relevant?
Hasn't it changed? And this AI is just unbelievable in terms of the prospects in front of us in terms of changing workplaces dramatically. It's quite extraordinary. I wonder whether one possibility is of I overinflate the importance of AI. The other is that I wonder whether people realise the magnitude of the change that's upon us. It is quite extraordinary. And if I'm right, if there is extraordinary change on the horizon, then I think companies really better be change ready. And to be change ready, you've got to have the culture that is change ready. That's what change ready means. It means the culture is ready and keen and able to adapt to change. And so I think that's an issue that confronts just about every organisation on the planet. Are we ready for change, and are we going to be left behind or lead the pack or whatever? So it's amazing times, I think.
Absolutely. I want to bring the conversation specifically to HR. What is the greatest challenge facing HR at the moment, and what is their role in helping companies become change ready?
HR has changed, hasn't it, over the years? It was called HR, less so now, but it was called HR. And in those days, it was policy enforcement, it was training and onboarding. It was a lot of reactive stuff. And now the name has changed in most cases. It's people and culture, or a variation of those words, which I think is significant. It represents the fact that people in the HR space are realising that they are about people and culture. And I think there's been a bit of a quandary for many HR people in terms of, are they fulfilling the people and culture role in terms of being proactive in addition to being reactive? And I think there's a question mark around that as it stands right now. Are people and culture people earning their place at the executive table through being strategic around those issues? Because if they're not now, they'd better be in the immediate future. And again, I think the conundrum about the notion of culture applies to people and culture people. Do they truly understand what culture means? There's a real risk, I think, because it's a bit of a buzzword now around this notion of culture. There's a real risk of superficiality. And I'll give you an example of this. I was asked last year to speak at a conference in the construction industry. It was a mental health and wellness conference. Now, every person in the room, the participants, the presenters, and I was one of the presenters, had good intentions. The intentions were good. But as I sat through this day, I got increasingly dejected because the presenters just provided stuff that most often was so superficial. I don't know if this is a global thing, but in Australia, we have an Are You OK Day, which is a day dedicated to mental health and wellness. Now, the intentions are good again, but that's a 1 day a year event. And if that's what we think, if we think that's how we fulfill our mental health and wellness issues, then we got it totally wrong. And I think the same principle can be applied to culture, because there's a lot of superficial stuff. And at an extreme end, we'd look at Apple and Google and say, we get a great culture by having table tennis tables and put in beanbags. It's a bit more serious than that. And I think, for what it's worth, I think that's where the notion of UGRs can help, because it gives a practical understanding that people's perceptions of this is the way we do things around here is what culture is. And to change the culture, we've got to change what's causing people's perceptions, or we've got to change people's perceptions. And both of those are valid, and in some cases, the right approach. So that's the essence, I think, and the need for HR people or people in culture leaders to really touch the heart of culture and get to it and help get organisations change ready.
Very valid points. Something I want to bring into the conversation, which is seemingly contrary, but I think is quite important, is the importance of two things. When we talk about HR being strategic, I think our personal philosophy at Whale is that if HR adopts more automation in their own routine tasks, they can focus on people and culture.
Yes.
And then the second is actually bringing culture into daily processes. So if
Yes.
it's the way we do things around here, exactly how does that look in reality? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, some good thoughts there, Lisa. So I was working with a senior group of a company in the UK, a very big company. I won't name them, but they used to be a massive bricks and mortar retailer. They've sustained that, but now gone online as well, big time. And I worked with their IT division, 6,000 people in their IT. No, so I'm sorry, I'm exaggerating. 600 people in their IT division, so a big organisation. And I said to their leaders, after having worked with their people for a full day, I said to their leaders this question. I said, if I went to your people right now and they're being open and honest with me, how would they answer this question? What are your leaders' top 3 priorities? Now, this group of leaders was silent and pondered that question for quite a while. And the first man to speak up, to his credit, said this. He said, Steve, we don't even know what our top 3 priorities are, so how would they? So a key question for every leader, and this includes HR leaders, is what would people deduce are your top 3 priorities? And would people and culture or values or a synonym of those words come out as a top 3 priority? You don't go to jail if it's not, but it's a serious question that leaders need to ponder. Because if we want it to be a top 3 priority, then I put to you, it is through, I'll give you another quick story. I'm working with another company. We're all interstate, and I'm with the leaders of this company. We're all interstate in Australia. So we're all away from our homes. We'll go out to dinner that evening. So I'm sat around a round table with the leaders of this company, and the HR director was sat next to me. And she, in passing, in casual conversation, says to the other leaders in the room, oh, by the way, I met Gary last week. Gary's about to join their senior leadership team from outside. She says, I met Gary last week, and just from the questions he asked, I know he's going to be terrific. I say to Lisa at that time, I say, we've got to meet as soon as we can, because you have just revealed something which is what I think is profound. We did meet, and I said to the group of leaders, it is through the questions that we ask and don't ask that people deduce what your top priorities are. And we as a group actually took time to create a list, a smorgasbord of ideas, if you like, of possible questions that we could ask as leaders that would demonstrate that culture and people values was a top 3 priority. So it's got to be thought about in that respect. If it's a top 3 priority, I was working with another company and I said, do you have standing agenda items? Yes, we do. What are they? They're finance and safety. And I said, so culture is not important then? And the leader looks at me and he says, no, it is important, Steve. And I said, no, it's not. Safety and finance is important. This leader turns to the rest of his leaders and says, we're changing our agenda structure to include culture as one of our standing agenda items. So it's the questions we ask, it's the how much time do we spend talking about it? We've got to put this stuff on the surface rather than let the UGRs, normally UGRs are under the table, discussions that happen after meetings or in the car park after work or around the water cooler when bosses aren't around. We've got to put this stuff that's under the table, on the table, and in constructive ways work at how we can make it even better than it currently is.
All of this sounds good and it sounds applicable to big companies? This is a question in that startups and companies that are scaling, is culture that important? Because at the end of the day, it's about survival. So I imagine survival takes priority over culture. Why would a CEO of a scaling company give any importance to culture?
I think the true test of a culture is what happens when things go wrong. That's and the same applies to customer service. The true test of customer service is what happens when the organisation is at its busiest. The same sort of principle applies to culture. So in startups, when the pressure is on, that's a real test for culture. So I've got a golden question, which I share happily. And I think this applies to a company which has 20 people as much as it does to a company that has 20,000 people. And the question is this: what does our culture need to look and feel like for us to truly be successful while also making this a great place to work? Now, the answers to that you can call values. My fear is that value statements, while crafted with good intent, are often created by asking the wrong question. Too often, I think the question is, so what do we want our values to be? So I think that's the wrong question because it's context free. The question ought to be, what does our culture need to look and feel like for us to truly be successful while also making this a great place to work? Now, that applies to a startup with 20 people. And we've got to think about, when the pressure's on, what do we want our culture to look and feel like? Because these should hold firm. If we're serious about our values, we should be constantly fighting for them, and they should be as non-negotiable as the prospect of embezzling money from the company. That's so much of a non-negotiable, it doesn't enter our heads. And the same should apply to values. I'm sorry, if we aren't a good fit, then maybe we've got to question whether we are a good fit. But this is the way we do things around here. And I think that applies in a company of any size. And look, I don't too often work with companies of 20 people, but certainly from 50 people upwards. I've worked with many companies that smaller end, and these principles apply. It's about relationships between people, how we treat each other, what happens when things go wrong, how transparent are we, to what extent do we communicate, to what extent do we constructively challenge people when the values are breached. These principles apply irrespective of the size of a company.
Thank you. Super helpful. Yeah, it's great. And that makes it very practical too. My last question is, I'm sure the question that everybody is asking if you look on LinkedIn and YouTube is, what does the future of work look like from your perspective?
Oh, who knows, Lisa? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I don't know if any of us can predict, other than the function of AI in all of this. It's extraordinary, the speed at which this is coming at us, the magnitude of the change. I was talking with a lawyer just yesterday, and there's systems in place now where AI gives you a response to a legal question, and that legal question is vetted by an actual lawyer. And each answer, as it's vetted, goes into the bank of confirmed answers for AI in future. So it won't need to be vetted the next time it's asked. It's extraordinary. AI creates videos for us now with cloned voices. It's just gobsmacking. So I come back to where I started. I think having an eye to what's happening in marketplaces is absolutely essential. I think being change ready. And by the way, there's another modification of my question that we could ask, and that is, for us to be change ready into the future, now and into the future, what does our culture need to look and feel like? So we can modify that question around certain aspects. Like I've done this with safety. For us to truly have a safe work environment, what does our culture need to look and feel like? But the same can be applied to change ready. For us to be change ready now and into the future, what does our culture need to look and feel like? And I think, apart from keeping tabs of what's happening in the marketplace and out there, the next best thing we can do is have our culture right and ready for this, and indeed have a hunger for this. Work with companies where they say we've got one of our values is constant improvement, and their answer to this is we've got systems in place to collect people's ideas, but they're perplexed because very few people are contributing ideas. My view is that this is a cultural issue, and it comes back to what is the appetite that leaders and others have for new ideas? Like, do their eyes roll? We can find out what the current UGRs are. So if we've got a value of constant improvement, we can get people anonymously to complete the sentence around here when someone comes up with a new idea. Lisa, we've literally had people write around here when someone comes up with a new idea, leaders pinch the good ones and claim them as their own. Now, we've literally had those words written. Now, that's my perception. That drives my behaviour. At the next meeting, somebody says any ideas on how we can improve. I've got one. There is no way I'm going to share that. So it doesn't matter what systems you have in place to collect these ideas. The UGR is driving people's behaviour. I think I'm biased because I've been working in this space for so long, but I just think culture is so important given the times we're in. It is so absolutely imperative to focus on this.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to add something else, but I actually think you've made a great point. And I'm not sure how to emphasize obviously we will be sharing this on our channels, but I'm not sure how to emphasize the importance of culture and how it relates to even company performance.
Right? Number one, go to AI. It might be able to help you. I create titles for my conference presentations now using ChatGPT or Claude. It comes up with stuff. I explain the context. It gives me titles that I would never, clever titles I would never have thought of. So that's one possibility. We did some other research, Lisa, and we asked this question. I think this is such a good question. And we stumbled on this. We said, if the culture of your workplace was to become as good as it realistically could, how much improvement would there be on people's performance/productivity? We gave people a sliding scale, started at 0. 0 is a legitimate answer. You might think the culture now realistically is as good as it's going to get. And then a sliding scale, 10%, 20, up to 100 and 100% plus. I ask that question of leaders anytime I get the chance. And typically the average comes out at 40%. That's 40, right? I say to leaders, if I'm feeling cheeky enough, I will say to the leaders, shame on you. If you've intuitively known that there is that capacity for performance improvement by getting the culture right, how can you have sat on this and not act on it? Through what other initiative could you possibly gain performance improvement of that magnitude? And assume you're wildly over optimistic. Harvard, let's make it 20%. Would you take it? Hello? So I think there is that missing connection in the minds of many leaders. They think that culture is soft and flowery rubbish. They haven't made that connection between culture and performance, which is essential. That question, I think, can help connect that dot.
Absolutely. Steve, thank you for your time today.